It was just another busy afternoon at one of the city's most popular upscale restaurants. The air smelled of freshly baked bread, sizzling meat, and a hint of rich, aromatic coffee. Waiters and waitresses moved briskly between tables, balancing, trays loaded with wine glasses and plates of carefully crafted dishes. The place was buzzing with the soft hum of conversations, clinking cutlery, and occasional laughter. Among the staff was a young black waitress who had been working there for a few years. She was known among her co-workers for her professionalism, her quick smile, and her ability to handle even the trickiest customers without losing her composure. She had learned early on that working in a high-end restaurant meant more than just taking orders and delivering food. It required patience, a thick skin, and a kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing her worth even when others didn't recognize it. On this particular afternoon, she had been assigned a large table near the window, a table reserved for VIP guests. As she approached, she noticed a man who immediately commanded attention. He wore an expensive suit, polished shoes, and a watch that probably cost more than some people made in a month. There was a presence about him, not just because of his wealth, but because of the way he carried himself. His associates were seated around him, all trying in their own ways to look important and impressive. The moment she reached the table, she offered her usual bright smile and polite greeting. "Good afternoon, welcome. Can I start you off with some drinks while you look at the menu?" she asked, her voice calm but confident. The man looked her over in a way that made her pause ever so slightly. There was a smirk on his face, the kind of smirk that seemed to say he thought he was superior to everyone around him. Then, in a voice just loud enough for her to hear, he said, "Do you really belong here?" For a moment, she froze. Not because she didn't know how to respond, but because the comment was so jarring. She had dealt with rude customers before, even a few who had let their prejudices show. But there was something about this man that felt different. He wasn't just dismissive, he was looking for a reaction. He was testing her. She took a slow breath and smiled, keeping her tone polite. "Yes, sir. I work here every day just like everyone else. Can I get you started with some water or tea?" The man chuckled, a sharp, cold laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't usually see people like you serving tables in places like this. Are you sure you're not in the wrong job?" His words weren't just rude. They carried an assumption, an expectation that she was somehow less capable because of the color of her skin. She felt the heat rise to her face, not from embarrassment, but from the familiar sting of injustice. She had encountered moments like this before, moments when people assumed things about her without ever taking the time to know her. She had learned to respond with grace, to meet arrogance with calmness, and to let her competence speak for itself. "Sir," she said softly, keeping her composure, "I'm confident in my work here. I make sure every guest has a great experience, and that's what I focus on." The man leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. He glanced at his associates as if to say, "Look at this," and then returned his gaze to her. "Well, that's cute, but I've seen a lot of servers in my life, and let's just say most of them aren't, how should I put it, ambitious like you seem to think you are." She noticed the subtle way he emphasized certain words, the way he tried to belittle her without being overtly aggressive. She also noticed the faint reactions of other guests. Some were uncomfortable, shuffling in their seats, pretending not to notice. Others looked away entirely, unwilling to intervene. She knew this was common in high-end settings. People didn't want to make a scene, even when they sensed someone was being unfairly targeted, but she didn't let it shake her. She had a strategy, even if it wasn't obvious to anyone else. She would keep serving, keep smiling, and wait for the right moment to respond, not with anger, but with something far more powerful: her voice, her words, and her dignity. As she took their drink orders, she moved smoothly, expertly balancing the tray in her hands. Every movement was precise, every gesture polished. The man made a few more offhand remarks, attempting to get under her skin, but she responded only with short, polite sentences. Nothing more. Nothing less. Every time he tried to provoke her, she stayed calm. Her colleagues noticed the subtle tension and a few exchanged glances, silently rooting for her. The table began to order, and she took note of the complicated requests with care. She knew that any mistake could be used against her, especially in front of someone who seemed determined to prove she didn't belong. But she didn't rush. She didn't panic. She focused, as always, on doing her job well. By the time the appetizers arrived, she had already managed to diffuse a few potential moments of embarrassment. One of his associates tried to make a condescending joke about her appearance, but she answered with the same calm professionalism she had maintained from the start. The billionaire noticed this, his smirk flickering slightly as he realized she wasn't reacting the way he expected. He leaned back, swirling his drink, trying to maintain an air of control. As she cleared the plates and brought out the next course, the energy at the table shifted subtly. Other diners began to steal glances, intrigued by the interaction. They could sense the unspoken tension, and the quiet strength of the waitress became more and more apparent. She wasn't loud, she wasn't confrontational, but there was something in her demeanor that demanded respect. Her mind was focused. She thought about the countless times she had faced assumptions about her ability, about the subtle ways people tried to diminish her confidence, and she realized that this moment was just another one of those challenges. But unlike before, she felt a spark of determination, a clear sense that this time she wouldn't just endure the situation. She would rise above it in a way that no one could ignore. As the meal continued, she kept the conversation professional, responding politely to questions about the menu and the chef's specials. The billionaire tried several more times to needle her, making comments about her education, her career choices, and even implying that she didn't deserve the job she had. But she met every comment with calm, thoughtful words. She smiled, nodded, and maintained eye contact, all without giving him the satisfaction of a reaction that suggested weakness or fear. What he didn't realize was that her calmness wasn't submission. It was strategy. She was waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to speak her truth in a way that could not be dismissed. She understood something very few people in that room seemed to grasp. Power didn't always come from wealth, status, or arrogance. Power could come from confidence, intelligence, and the courage to stand firm in the face of disrespect. By the time dessert was served, a small crowd of staff had gathered quietly nearby, watching. They were impressed not just by her grace but by the quiet dignity she maintained while under pressure. Even some patrons at nearby tables couldn't help but watch, curious about the tension that seemed to radiate from that one table. And then, she realized it was almost time. She could feel the moment approaching. He had been testing her all afternoon, expecting her to falter, to apologize, to show even a flicker of insecurity. But she hadn't. Not once. And now, she knew that one simple sentence, clear, confident, and sharp, would shift the entire room. It would say everything that needed to be said without shouting, without aggression, without losing her dignity. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. She just waited, focused, letting the anticipation build, because she knew that when the moment came, she would speak, and everyone would listen. The restaurant had grown quieter in a way that wasn't obvious at first. People were still talking and eating, but there was an underlying tension near that one table that seemed to ripple through the room. The billionaire and his associates were continuing their lunch, but the energy had subtly shifted. He had tried to assert control earlier, but every attempt seemed to fall short. His smirk no longer held the same confidence. There was now a faint flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was beginning to realize that this waitress was unlike anyone he had encountered before. Meanwhile, she moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing plates and glasses, keeping the conversations light and polite. Every step she took was purposeful, every gesture deliberate. She noticed small things other people might miss, the way his hand tightened around his glass when she approached, the slight twitch in his smile when he realized she wasn't intimidated, the way his associates glanced at him as if questioning whether he could maintain control over the situation. She didn't let it distract her. She had been in high-pressure situations before, and she knew how to read the room without letting it affect her composure. As she refilled glasses, she maintained her usual charm. "Would anyone like a refill on water or tea?" she asked politely, glancing at each person in turn. Her voice was calm, even, and steady, and carried an air of quiet confidence. The billionaire said nothing at first, probably expecting her to stumble, to miss a cue, or to let her frustration show. But she didn't. She didn't flinch, she didn't argue, and she didn't apologize for being competent at her job. One of his associates tried to lighten the mood with a joke, a little jab at the waitress's expense that he thought would make everyone laugh. It was a small thing, but it carried a tone of superiority that made her skin tingle. She smiled politely, nodding to acknowledge the comment, and responded with a neutral tone. "I'll make sure your meal is exactly how you like it." That was all she said. Nothing more. Nothing less. It wasn't confrontational, but it was firm. The billionaire's smirk returned, but it was weaker this time. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You're very confident for someone in your position." There was a mocking undertone, as if he expected her to take offense, but instead of reacting the way he wanted, she met his gaze calmly. Her expression didn't betray anger or fear, only quiet assurance. "Yes, sir," she said smoothly. "I'm confident because I know my work, and I take pride in doing it well. That's all anyone should need to know." The words seemed simple, but there was a subtle strength in them that caught the billionaire off guard. He didn't expect someone to answer so firmly without raising their voice, without shouting, without acting aggressive. He had assumed that power came from wealth, from status, from loudness. He hadn't accounted for the power of composure, intelligence, and dignity. She continued to serve, moving from table to table with the same poise. The other diners couldn't help but notice the dynamic unfolding near the VIP table. Some were quietly impressed by her ability to stay calm under pressure, while others were curious, leaning slightly forward to see what would happen next. The staff watched too, sharing subtle nods with each other, silently cheering her on. During the next round of food, the billionaire decided to push further. He made another condescending remark, this time about her career prospects. "I can't imagine you going far in life with this kind of job," he said. "Do you even have plans? Beyond serving tables?" Most people in her position might have felt hurt or defensive. Many would have stumbled, apologized unnecessarily, or tried to make excuses. But she didn't. She had spent years learning how to hold her ground without being disrespectful, and she knew that her words could carry more weight than his arrogance. She paused for a moment, making sure her tone was calm and steady. "I do have plans," she said quietly. "And they don't depend on what anyone else thinks of me. I focus on what I can control, and I make sure I do my best every day. That's how I measure success." The billionaire's associates exchanged awkward glances. He frowned, realizing that his attempts to intimidate her were not only failing, but were also highlighting his own impatience and lack of tact. He tried to regain control, leaning forward slightly and attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She could see it. She could see that he was losing his grip on the situation, and she felt a quiet satisfaction, not out of spite, but because she had held herself with dignity, and that dignity spoke louder than any insult he could throw. She knew the moment was coming when her words would finally resonate with everyone in the room. As she brought the next round of drinks, she made small talk with other tables, laughing softly with some customers, answering questions about the menu with a friendly tone, and keeping the atmosphere light for everyone else. The contrast between her professionalism and his arrogant attempts to dominate the conversation made him look increasingly out of place. Patrons nearby began to notice, exchanging subtle looks that said, "Who does he think he is?" At one point, he tried another tactic. He leaned over slightly and said, "You're very bold for someone in your position. Boldness is nice, but it can be dangerous." The words were meant to unsettle her, to make her hesitate, to make her question herself, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled politely, maintained eye contact, and said nothing. The silence itself was powerful, sending a clear message that she was not afraid and that his intimidation tactics had no effect. The energy at the table shifted even more. She could feel it. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. She knew that one sentence delivered at the right moment could turn the entire room's attention toward her and away from his arrogance. She had seen it happen before, how quiet strength could have a bigger impact than loud confrontation. As she cleared a few plates, she overheard snippets of conversation from nearby diners. Some whispered to their companions, commenting on how calm and professional she was. Others, more curious, glanced repeatedly at the table, sensing that something unusual was happening. Even the staff behind the counter were watching, marveling at her ability to handle someone so arrogant without losing her composure. She walked past the window and caught her reflection for a brief second. She looked at herself and felt a steady confidence. She knew that the next moment when it arrived had to be perfect, not just for her but for every person who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or belittled. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for anyone who had been made to feel less than because of someone else's arrogance. Her heart remained calm, but her mind was sharp. She thought about how she wanted to respond, choosing her words carefully. It wasn't just about shocking him. It was about speaking the truth in a way that could not be ignored and in a way that left no room for argument. She wanted her response to be powerful, respectful, and memorable. The billionaire seemed oblivious to her inner planning. He continued to make small jabs, trying to regain his earlier air of superiority. But now, every word he spoke seemed weaker, less convincing. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the slight twitch of frustration around his mouth, the way he kept checking his watch as if impatient with the situation. His attempts to belittle her were no longer effective. They were only highlighting his insecurity. She moved smoothly, bringing the last of the plates to the table. The room seemed to quiet down a little, though nothing had been said yet. Other diners glanced over, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The staff were watching, some with wide eyes, some with subtle nods of encouragement. She had created a small, invisible stage, and she was ready to speak. As she took a step back to give the table space, she could feel the moment approaching. He leaned slightly forward, expecting her to react to his next jab. She didn't. Instead, she met his gaze, calm, composed, and confident. She knew that in the next few seconds, one sentence, carefully chosen, thoughtfully delivered, would change the entire dynamic. It would not only put him in his place but also leave an impression on everyone present. Her mind was clear. Her voice was steady. Her timing was perfect. She had waited all afternoon for this moment, and she was ready. The room seemed to hold its breath. Every subtle sound, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of chairs, the faint hum of conversation, felt louder than usual. The billionaire leaned back slightly, expecting her to falter at any second. He had tried everything he could think of: mockery, condescension, jabs at her intelligence, subtle digs about her background, but she had met every attempt with calm, quiet strength. He had assumed she would break. He had assumed she would stumble. He had assumed she would fear him. But none of that had happened. She took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the calm that came from knowing she was ready. She had waited for this moment, and she knew exactly what she wanted to say. It wasn't meant to humiliate, insult, or shame anyone. It was meant to assert her dignity, to show that respect wasn't given by status or wealth, but by how you carry yourself. She wanted her words to be remembered, not just by him but by everyone in the room. She began to speak, her voice soft at first, measured and confident. "Sir," she said, drawing his attention without raising it in anger. "I serve people every day." The billionaire raised an eyebrow, probably thinking this was just the polite preamble to an apology or explanation. But she didn't stop there. She continued, each word precise, deliberate, and deliberate in tone. "I serve people every day, and I do it with pride. I do it with skill, patience, and respect. That's the kind of service that matters. That's the kind of respect that is earned, not demanded by money, power, or a title." Her eyes met his. She didn't look away. She didn't soften the words. She let them land fully, knowing that every person listening would feel the weight of her statement. The room seemed to pause, as if the air itself was waiting for the next moment. The billionaire's smirk faltered. For a second, his associates exchanged glances, unsure how to react. The words weren't confrontational, but they were sharp. They didn't attack him personally, they didn't shout or scream. But they carried a quiet authority that was impossible to ignore. Everyone at the table, everyone nearby, suddenly recognized the power in her composure and intelligence. She could see it in the way he leaned back slightly, the way his hand trembled ever so subtly around his glass. His confidence, which had seemed untouchable earlier, was cracking. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing that whatever he said now could only make him look worse. She continued calmly, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the message to sink in. Respect, she said softly but firmly, isn't something you can buy. It isn't something you can demand, it's something you give, and something you earn. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, it was clear that he was out of control. His arrogance, which had carried him through countless boardrooms and meetings, had no effect here. He had assumed that his wealth and status would intimidate her, but he had underestimated her entirely. Patrons at nearby tables had begun to notice. Some leaned forward slightly, curious. Others whispered softly, admiration in their voices. Staff, members who had been silently watching, exchanged glances that said, "She did it." She stood her ground. Even his own associates were looking at him differently, realizing that the table's dynamic had shifted completely. She finished her one-sentence declaration with calm authority. "I may serve you your food today, but my dignity, my intelligence, and my worth are never on the menu." The room went quiet for a moment. It wasn't awkward silence, it was a pause filled with recognition. Her words had landed with impact. They were simple, yet powerful. They were polite, yet impossible to ignore. And they carried a kind of truth that everyone could see. The billionaire stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock, frustration, and, deep down, a dawning realization. He had tried to belittle her, to make her feel small, to assert his dominance. But he had failed. Completely. And everyone in the room knew it. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had built over the course of the afternoon was replaced with admiration. People were quietly impressed by her composure and courage. They weren't applauding out loud yet, but the nods, the wide eyes, the whispered comments were enough to show that she had captured the respect of everyone present. She didn't wait for him to respond. She didn't need to. Her words had spoken for themselves. She stepped back gracefully, allowing the table space, and returned to her work, carrying herself with the same poise and confidence as before. Her movement alone conveyed the message. She was unfazed, unshaken, and in control. The billionaire, on the other hand, was struggling. He wanted to recover, to assert his dominance in some way, but it was clear that he didn't know how. Every attempt to speak now seemed hollow. Every gesture seemed forced. He had underestimated the power of words spoken with dignity, of confidence carried without arrogance. Her colleagues were quietly supportive. They knew how much courage it took to stand up in that moment, to face someone so openly arrogant without losing composure. They had seen her handle difficult customers before, but this was different. This was someone who tried to undermine not just her work, but her sense of self. And she had not only survived the encounter, she had turned it on its head. Even other diners were noticing. Some leaned closer, trying to catch snippets of the conversation. Some whispered to companions, saying things like, "Did you hear that?" Or, "Wow, she didn't even raise her voice." It was clear that her one sentence had made an impact far beyond the table. For the billionaire, the room's recognition only made things worse. He realized that his status and wealth meant nothing here. He could not buy respect. He could not command admiration. And he could not intimidate someone who had the confidence to stand her ground. The arrogance he had relied on all his life was powerless against someone who knew her worth. And yet, she didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply continued to do her job, serving the remaining dishes with professionalism, with a smile, and with calm efficiency. Her focus remained on her work, not on the impact she had made. That was part of what made her response so powerful. She didn't need recognition to validate her courage. She acted with dignity because it was who she was, not because anyone else demanded it. As the meal drew to a close, the billionaire sat in stunned silence. He had come into the restaurant expecting control, expecting admiration, expecting to be served in a way that reinforced his sense of superiority. Instead, he found himself humbled, reminded that respect cannot be demanded, that intelligence cannot be dismissed, and that true strength often comes quietly, without fanfare. The other guests at the restaurant were still noticing. Some were smiling quietly to themselves, recognizing the courage it took to speak so firmly yet politely. Others whispered excitedly, feeling inspired by what they had witnessed. The staff behind the counter exchanged knowing glances, silently, congratulating her for the way she had handled the encounter. Even the manager, who had been watching carefully, gave her a subtle nod of approval, a recognition of both her composure and her courage. It was a rare moment, the kind that left a lasting impression, not just because of the words she had spoken, but because of the way she carried herself, calm, composed, and unshakable. The power of her response wasn't in anger or confrontation. It was in the quiet confidence that she projected, in the unwavering sense of self-respect that radiated from her every gesture. As she cleared the table, she caught the billionaire's eye one last time. He was silent, his face a mix of realization and embarrassment. She didn't need to say anything more. The message had been delivered, and it would stay with him far longer than any insult or comment he had made earlier. Her colleagues quietly stepped in to help her with the remaining dishes, but she didn't feel the need for assistance. She had handled the situation on her own, with skill and dignity. She knew that what she had done mattered, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated or disrespected because of how they looked, where they came from, or what others assumed about them. By the time she finished her shift, the story had already begun to spread. Some patrons who had witnessed the moment shared their admiration on social media, praising her courage and professionalism. The incident quickly gained attention online, with many people celebrating her ability to stand up for herself with dignity and intelligence. And for her, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about knowing that she had remained true to herself, that she had not compromised her dignity, and that she had handled a difficult situation in the best way possible. She had shown that strength doesn't always come from power or wealth, but from self-respect, confidence, and the courage to speak the truth. After she delivered her one powerful sentence, the room was filled with a tension that was unlike anything before. It wasn't the uncomfortable tension of confrontation, but the quiet, heavy pause of realization. Everyone at the table, everyone nearby, suddenly seemed to recognize the shift. The billionaire, who had spent the whole meal trying to assert dominance, was now completely off balance. His associates were exchanging confused glances, unsure how to respond. The words she had spoken were calm and polite, but they carried authority and strength that could not be ignored. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the staff paused, momentarily frozen by what they had just witnessed. It was rare to see someone stand up to a person of such obvious wealth and status without being confrontational or loud, and she had done it effortlessly. Her confidence, her calm demeanor, and her intelligence radiated so clearly that it left everyone in the room stunned. The billionaire tried to respond, clearing his throat as if to regain control of the situation. "Well, I didn't expect that," he said, his voice slightly strained. He tried to laugh, a weak attempt at humor, but it came across as forced. His associates didn't laugh. The other diners didn't laugh. The moment had already shifted away from him, and his attempt to recover fell flat. She didn't interrupt or react. She simply continued her work, moving gracefully to clear a few plates from the table. Her body language was calm and professional. She didn't gloat. She didn't show satisfaction, but every small gesture conveyed strength. It was clear that she was unfazed. She had handled the situation with dignity, and now she was letting the impact speak for itself. Nearby diners began to whisper quietly. Some leaned slightly forward, curious to see how the billionaire would react next. Others whispered to companions, expressing admiration for the waitress's courage. "Did you hear what she said?" one person murmured. "I can't believe how calm she stayed. That was amazing." Another whispered, "She didn't even shout, and she made him look ridiculous without saying a word to attack him." The staff, behind the counter who had been observing the entire interaction, exchanged glances and subtle nods of approval. They were impressed, not just by her words but by the way she had maintained her composure throughout the entire ordeal. It wasn't easy to stay calm under pressure, especially when someone was trying to belittle you openly in front of others. They knew that her courage was real, not performative. The manager, who had been monitoring the situation quietly, stepped in subtly, approaching the table with a polite smile. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" he asked, addressing the billionaire's group. His tone was professional, but there was a slight hint of recognition in his eyes, a recognition of the way she had handled the difficult situation. The billionaire nodded curtly, clearly unsure how to respond, and muttered a few words that didn't carry much conviction. Her co-workers began to offer quiet encouragement. One of them approached and whispered, "That was incredible. You handled that so well." Another added, "I don't know if I could have stayed that calm. You were amazing." She smiled politely, appreciating their support, but she didn't let it distract her. She remained focused on her work, knowing that her professionalism was just as important as her courage in that moment. The billionaire seemed increasingly frustrated. Every time he tried to regain control of the conversation, she met him with calm, polite responses. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that wealth and status alone couldn't command respect or silence someone who knew her worth. He had underestimated the power of composure and intelligence, and now it was clear that his attempts to intimidate her had failed. As the meal came to an end, the staff subtly began to assist her with clearing the table. They wanted to make sure. She wasn't overwhelmed, but she handled it effortlessly. Patrons nearby continued to watch, some nodding in admiration, others whispering quietly about what they had witnessed. The moment had become more than just a tense interaction between a customer and a server. It had become a demonstration of dignity, respect, and quiet strength. The billionaire's associates started to speak quietly among themselves, clearly unsure how to respond to what had happened. They looked at their leader, realizing that his usual air of authority had been undermined. Some of them even seemed embarrassed, as if they were seeing a side of him that they hadn't expected. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and the billionaire himself seemed to understand it, even if he didn't want to admit it. After presenting the final check, she maintained her polite smile and professional tone. "Thank you for visiting us today. I hope you enjoyed your meal." She handed the check over with care, ensuring that every gesture reflected her calm and professional demeanor. He took the check without a word, clearly flustered. Once the table left, the whispers of admiration became more noticeable. Patrons began talking among themselves, expressing their surprise and respect. "I've never seen anyone handle that kind of arrogance so gracefully," one whispered. "She didn't have to shout or argue, and yet she made him look ridiculous," said another. The story of what had happened started to spread immediately within the restaurant, with staff and patrons alike sharing their impressions. Back in the kitchen, her co-workers congratulated her quietly. They didn't make a big show of it, knowing that she preferred to keep her professionalism intact, but their eyes and smiles said everything. They admired her for standing up with intelligence and dignity rather than anger. They admired her for showing that confidence and self-respect could speak louder than wealth and arrogance. Even the manager gave her a subtle nod and a quiet comment. "You handled that incredibly well. I don't think I've seen anyone do it quite like that before." She smiled, a mixture of gratitude and calm satisfaction. She didn't need to boast or make a scene. Her actions had already spoken louder than words. As the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, she continued serving other tables with the same professionalism and warmth as always. But something had changed. Patrons who had witnessed the interaction now looked at her differently, with subtle admiration and respect. Even those who hadn't directly seen it could sense the shift in the atmosphere. She had not only maintained her dignity, but she had also set an example for everyone in the room. The billionaire, now outside the restaurant, reflected quietly on what had happened. He had entered expecting control, expecting admiration, expecting compliance. Instead, he had been shown, politely and calmly, that respect is not commanded, it is earned. His usual confidence, built on wealth and status, had been challenged in a way he hadn't anticipated. The lesson was clear. True strength is quiet, dignified, and unwavering, and it can come from anyone, regardless of their position in society. Meanwhile, her colleagues continued to offer encouragement throughout the rest of the day. They told her how impressed they were, how much courage it had taken to maintain composure, and how they hoped to learn from her example. She appreciated their support, but she remained humble. To her, it was simply a matter of doing what was right, standing tall, speaking clearly, and maintaining professionalism in the face of arrogance. Outside the restaurant, some patrons who had witnessed the interaction shared their admiration on social media. Photos of the restaurant interior were posted with comments praising her courage, her composure, and her intelligence. The story quickly began to spread, with people marveling at how she had handled the situation without shouting or confrontation, simply through calm, confident words and dignity. By the end of the day, her actions had made a lasting impression on everyone who had seen them. She had shown that one person's courage and composure could outshine arrogance and wealth. She had demonstrated that dignity and self-respect are far more powerful than intimidation and condescension. And she had proven that sometimes, all it takes is a calm, well-chosen sentence to change the dynamics of an entire room. Her colleagues, patrons, and even the manager reflected on what had happened. Everyone agreed that what she had done was remarkable, not because it was confrontational or aggressive, but because it was calm, thoughtful, and dignified. It was a reminder that true strength comes from within, that confidence can speak louder than power, and that respect is always earned, not demanded. By the time she clocked out for the day, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She hadn't needed to shout or argue. She had simply been herself, confident, professional, and unwavering. And in doing so, she had left a mark on everyone who had witnessed the moment. Even as she walked home that evening, she thought about the impact of her actions. She knew that her words and composure had inspired not only the patrons and staff present, but also countless others who would hear about the incident. She had reminded people that courage doesn't always come in loud, dramatic displays. Sometimes it comes quietly, patiently, and confidently. And sometimes all it takes is one sentence to make the world take notice. After the incident, life at the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy had changed in subtle ways. The staff no longer viewed the waitress in the same way they had before. She had always been competent and professional, but now there was a quiet respect for the way she had handled the billionaire's arrogance. It wasn't just that she had stood up for herself. It was how she had done it, with intelligence, grace, and absolute composure. Her co-workers began to approach her differently. They sought her advice on dealing with difficult customers and asked her how she stayed so calm under pressure. "I don't know if I could have done what you did today," one whispered during a quiet moment. Another said, "You didn't just handle that situation. You taught all of us something about confidence and respect." She smiled at them, feeling both proud and humbled. She knew it wasn't about boasting. It was about showing that dignity and calmness could overcome arrogance. News of the incident had started to spread outside the restaurant as well. Some of the patrons who had witnessed the interaction shared their admiration on social media, posting about the waitress's courage and professionalism. People were captivated by the story because it was relatable, yet extraordinary. It wasn't a story of shouting or confrontation. It was a story of quiet strength and intelligence that left a lasting impression. Soon, the story began to gain attention from local news outlets. Reporters reached out, asking if they could interview her about the experience. They wanted to know how she managed to stay so composed, how she found the courage to speak up, and what advice she had for others facing similar situations. She agreed to the interviews, not seeking fame, but hoping that sharing her experience might inspire others to face challenges with dignity and confidence. In the interviews, she spoke candidly about her approach. "I've learned that confidence and respect are more powerful than anger or confrontation," she said. "When someone tries to belittle you, the most important thing is to stay calm and speak the truth clearly. You don't need to shout or fight. You just need to be yourself and know your worth." Her words resonated with people from all walks of life. Many viewers shared that they had faced similar situations and felt encouraged to handle them with the same grace she had demonstrated. The attention she received didn't change her behavior. She continued working at the restaurant, serving customers with the same professionalism as always. But now, there was a new sense of purpose in her work. She realized that every interaction, every moment of challenge, was an opportunity to show the power of composure and dignity. She wasn't just serving food. She was setting an example, quietly teaching others that strength could be shown without aggression or arrogance. Her story also began to spark broader conversations about respect and professionalism. People discussed it online, in offices, and even in schools. It became a reminder that true authority comes from character, not wealth, status, or intimidation. The billionaire, who had unintentionally become part of this story, also faced subtle, public scrutiny. People discussed how even the most powerful individuals could be humbled by quiet confidence and intelligence. Back at the restaurant, the atmosphere among the staff shifted positively. They were more united, more supportive of one another, and more aware of the value of mutual respect. The manager began holding short discussions with the team about how to handle challenging situations professionally, often using her example as a teaching moment. Her actions had inspired not only the patrons and colleagues, but also those in leadership roles to think more deeply about respect, professionalism, and personal dignity. Over time, her story reached beyond the city. Social media posts were shared widely, with people praising her ability to face arrogance with composure. Some people even reached out to her personally, sharing their gratitude and telling her how her example had encouraged them to face similar challenges in their own lives. She received messages from people who had experienced workplace discrimination, school bullying, or other forms of unfair treatment, all expressing how her courage gave them hope. Through all this attention, she remained humble. She didn't see herself as extraordinary. She simply saw herself as someone who acted with integrity and composure when faced with disrespect. She believed that anyone could handle similar situations if they stayed calm, understood their own worth, and spoke clearly when necessary. Her humility made her story even more powerful because it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about demonstrating values that anyone could adopt. The impact on the restaurant was noticeable too. Patrons began returning, curious to meet the waitress who had handled such a tense situation with grace. Some came specifically to see her, quietly impressed by her professionalism and kindness. The restaurant itself received positive attention, as the staff and management were recognized for fostering an environment where respect and dignity mattered. She also started mentoring some of the newer staff members, teaching them how to manage difficult customers and challenging situations. Her lessons were simple: stay calm, speak clearly, maintain your dignity, and never let someone else's arrogance define your self-worth. These lessons went beyond restaurant service. They were life lessons about confidence, respect, and personal strength. As months went by, her story continued to be cited as an example of quiet courage. It appeared in articles about professionalism, respect in the workplace, and dealing with difficult people. People from various industries shared it in training sessions and workshops, using her experience to teach the importance of composure, dignity, and clear communication. The waitress herself never sought recognition, but her story naturally became a source of inspiration. Even the billionaire's behavior began to change, though subtly. He became more cautious in public, more aware of how arrogance could be perceived, and perhaps even more respectful in his interactions. While he never publicly acknowledged the incident, Those who followed the story knew the lesson had been learned. Her one sentence had not only challenged him in that moment, but had also left a lasting mark on how he carried himself afterward. For her, the long-term impact was personal as well. She gained a deeper understanding of her own strength and resilience. She realized that confidence and dignity weren't just tools for dealing with difficult people. They were ways to navigate life. She became more self-assured, more aware of her abilities, and more committed to treating others with respect, regardless of how they treated her. Her friends and family noticed the change too. They admired how calmly she had handled a situation that would have shaken many people. They often reminded her that she had become an example for others, not because she sought attention, but because she acted with courage and integrity. They encouraged her to continue sharing her experiences, knowing that her story had the power to inspire countless people. Even beyond her immediate circle, her story had a ripple effect. People who had never set foot in that restaurant were inspired by her example. Teachers used her story to teach students about self-respect and standing up to unfair treatment. Managers shared it with employees as a case study in handling workplace challenges professionally. Online communities praised her courage, discussing how confidence and dignity could change situations more effectively than anger or confrontation. Her actions had shown something powerful, that respect is earned through integrity, professionalism, and calm confidence. She had demonstrated that one person, no matter their position, could influence the attitudes and behaviors of others simply by standing firm in their values. The story reminded everyone that dignity and self-respect are timeless qualities that can transform even the most uncomfortable situations. Through all this attention and recognition, she remained true to herself. She didn't become arrogant or boastful. She continued to treat customers with kindness, colleagues with respect, and herself with confidence. The incident had given her a sense of empowerment, but it hadn't changed her character. She understood that her strength came not from the attention she received, but from the way she carried herself in every interaction, large or small. And so the story of that afternoon became more than just a moment of personal triumph. It became a lesson for anyone who had ever faced arrogance, disrespect, or unfair treatment. It became a reminder that courage doesn't always roar. It can speak quietly, firmly, and clearly. It became proof that dignity, professionalism, and confidence are tools that anyone can use to navigate life's challenges. Years later, people would still recall the moment. Patrons who had been in the restaurant that day would smile, remembering how one person's words had shifted the energy in a room and left a lasting impression. Colleagues would recount the story to new employees, emphasizing how to handle challenges with grace and integrity. And for her, the experience remained a defining moment, a demonstration of the power of calm, composed courage. Her life continued, enriched by the lessons she had learned and the respect she had earned. She understood that real influence comes not from wealth, status, or intimidation, but from character, composure, and the quiet strength to speak the truth. And in every interaction after that day, she carried that lesson with her, knowing that respect, dignity, and courage are always more powerful than arrogance, condescension, or entitlement.